Okay, we're all gathered again. We'll make a start. Welcome to our final session of the conference called Reconstructing Form and Function. We have two papers in this session, and we'll carry on as we have before. We'll listen to both papers and then invite discussion and questions. So our first speaker is Guido Rebecchini from the Courtauld Institute, and he's going to be speaking on Giulio Romano's drawings for metalwork, form and function. Guido has been Professor of Renaissance and Early Modern Art at the Courtauld since 2013. He has held numerous fellowships, including from the British Academy, Villa Itati, and the Getty Museum, amongst others, and has published extensively on 16th century art, history, and culture, particularly on Mantua, Rome, and Florence. His latest book was entitled The Rome of Paul III, Art, Ritual, and Urban Renewal. He has also co-curated exhibitions on Giulio Romano and on Parmigianino. So we welcome Guido.
Thank you very much, Lydia, for the kind presentation, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me today. This is a really wonderful opportunity to discuss my own topic and your topics, and a fitting moment of reunion of a group that has been in touch over a number of years, I think, at this point. So my paper looks at one particular, very specific aspect of the production of the artist Giulio Romano, whom we have encountered already in Linda's paper. And in particular is a production that developed after Giulio's move to Mantua in September 1524, when he became a court artist at the service of the Gonzaga family. Giulio Romano is very well known to everyone for his multiple output in terms of altarpieces, fresco architecture, urban design, and I will be looking at, in particular, at drawings, design drawings for objects, a large number of which has come down to us. It is rather an anomaly that we have many drawings in this particular category by an individual artist. The rate of survival, we don't know exactly, but a lot of these drawings are still extant in museum collections and private collections as well. What was the function of these drawings, and why have they survived in such large numbers? What can we argue from the material evidence that the drawing themselves offer to answer this question, the question of their function? And how does their form relate to such function, whichever it may have been? Of course, drawings of this kind were used to communicate information with goldsmiths. And here we have to take into consideration a type of production that involved not one workshop, but at least two workshops. The workshop of the designer and the workshop of the goldsmith, of the executor of the ideas of the artist. We are at a later moment compared to the examples we've seen, we've heard about from Perugino, and here uniqueness, the uniqueness of the invention is of paramount importance. And Giulio is from Rome and is not confident that local goldsmiths are able to, in Mantua, to execute his ideas in Mantua, so continues for 16 years of his career in Mantua to use workshops in Rome, executing his invented objects in silver until 1540. This is a classic example of a very, how to say it, fantastic invention for an object, and he needed to show how the lid should open, how the goldsmith needed to understand how what function this object could perform. We have ample evidence of the problems of communication in this transmission of information. We have documentary evidence. I'm going to detail a case which is quite interesting in this respect. So there is a goldsmith in Rome who has been commissioned to realize a ceremonial mace, kind of a very ceremonial objects after a drawing by Giulio Romano, but has been unfaithful to the drawing. And because the agent reports he had made the foliage of the handle according to his own will, and so he did for the balaustro, so a miniaturized architecture clearly on the mace, completely different from the drawing. The result of this misstep on the part of the goldsmith resulted in the rejection of the object and in the commissioning of it from another goldsmith who instead was more faithful, and yet he could not quite understand how the design worked. And so there is a back and forth of letters detailing whether there were to be 3 or 4 eagles on the handle of this mace. He could not understand whether it was a tripartite ground plan or had to be 4. So this example shows the complexity in the transmission of information and how these drawings were at once very useful, of course, in transmitting information, but how the translation of these objects from the bidimensional surface to a 3-dimensional object was complicated. We have evidence. We can detail this process also visually through by looking closely at this object designed again, this soul cellar, a little vessel supported by 3 goats in this case, 3 goats who are turning their neck to lick the salt that it was contained in the vessel itself. So when looking at these objects which was going to be displayed in an exhibition that, as mentioned, was opening at the end of 2022 in Mantua, the Palazzo Te, and when collaborating with the firm Factum Arte to reconstruct these objects and to go through the process that the goldsmiths would have gone through in translating this bidimensional drawing into a 3-dimensional object, we had a few missteps, exactly as the goldsmith in the 16th century did. So the first model that was given to us by Factum was an exact reproduction of the drawing, with the 2 goats placed almost on a plane in the foreground, except the question immediately arose of how this vessel is going to stand on perched on the side of one side of the back of these goats. Clearly, this was a solution that did not offer any stability to the object, to the vessel itself. Clearly, the goldsmith in charge of realizing that object had to interpret the drawing, and the drawing was made to convey as much information as possible. In fact, it was made to convey the information of how the goat looked like and what the 2 sides of the goats in particular, of each goat in particular, looked like. The goats were molded separately from the object. Because So this would have been the funny triangular shape resulting from this literal solution when interpreted appropriately. And so the goat would have been placed radially to support the vessel. We had this new configuration that allowed a symmetrical and more stable solution, except the goldsmith would not have been able to see entirely the animal if foreshortened in the drawing. So there was a process of distortion on the part of Giulio Romano and a process of interpretation on the part of the goldsmith. The goldsmith had to correct the drawing, which was intended to both provide detailed information about the object, the shape of the goat, and more and at the same time information about the whole thing, so that the resulting object, in fact, that we can see here, realized in metal, according to moving from the use of digital techniques to the workmanship of artisans expert in molding and casting metal, resulted in an object that is different. You can see that the goats are foreshortened as we see them from the front and different from the drawing. But what does this is the final object. But what does the drawing that we've seen before, this one, tell us about its actual use? What was the function of this particular drawing, which was meant to convey information between two workshops located 500 kilometers apart? It tells us nothing, because the drawing used in the goldsmith shop is not this one. This is an immaculate drawing that shows no signs of use. There are no tears, no folds, no stains. It's in perfect condition. So this is not the actual drawing that was necessary for the goldsmith to realize the object. So what's the purpose of this particular drawing? Actually, we can be pretty sure that the vast majority of the drawings of these category of drawings that survive to this day come from Giulio Romano's workshop, because they were acquired by Jacopo Strada from Giulio's son in Mantua, and they are now preserved in Prague in a collection which is called Strahov Codex, which contains 265 of these designs, some sketches and original inventions, some are copies, and some are copies of copies. So it's a very complex, there's something complex going on here in Giulio Romano's workshop in terms of inventing and reproducing these objects. So let's consider another example, an egg stand made for Cardinal Ercole Gonzaga, documented in the inventory of the silverware of Cardinal Ercole Gonzaga. In the same codex that I've just mentioned, we have both the sketch by Giulio. You see that it's a free invention. There's a free handling of the pen to define the form, and not far from it, 3 pages ahead, there's a very fair copy, finished copy that is probably not by Giulio Romano's hand, but by someone very, very close to him, and made probably on the basis of a sketch, that sketch or a sketch similar to that. So this is, in my opinion, an archive, a workshop archive, an archive of models and inventions that get filed by the artist to preserve his own invention. So the sequence that we would have, it's a sketch, a final version sent to Rome to a goldsmith and then lost in the process, and certainly not returned by the goldsmith himself to Giulio Romano, and a workshop copy or a version of it made to last in the workshop itself. In turn, this last drawing that we've seen was reproduced further, and so we have in the Courtauld we have this copy, which is slightly even more distant from the original in terms of its quality, but clearly shows that this archive was, as well as a repository of invention, a means of disseminating ideas in this context. So the process would be the sketch, this final lost working version, an archival copy, and then a further copy that may have been disseminated, may have been added by some other later member of Giulio's workshop or someone with access to it. That archive is the key word. That the archival method is important. Is shown by drawings that contains inscription that tell us for whom the object was made, such as this one. But how did the process actually work? When looking at let's go back to the drawing with the goats. When looking at the Courtauld drawing, I had the measurements taken electronically there. You can see the various measurements taken. And this in particular, 184 millimeters, correspond exactly to the dimension of the equivalent size between the equivalent points in a version of the same drawing, which is in the V&A. What happened here is that the final archival copy has been incised and it has incisions and transferred to another version that also in Giulio's workshop was realized. A version that is of good quality, of very proximate to Giulio's, but a bit faster. And you can see that, well, we could see that the pen marks are a bit more synthetic than those in the previous version. So this particular drawing was eventually copied further, was eventually used further to exactly like the egg stand. And in copies that are further distanced for the original. But why does this? What does this process tell us about? Why were these objects copied so often? Surely not for replicating the object. The uniqueness of the object was the key ingredient to its success. These objects was made for one person on a specific occasion of a very expensive material, And there's never any sense that these objects were replicated. Rather, the originality of the invention was absolutely crucial to their success. So these inventions could be used in different medias, as we see here. And we could argue that Giulio also loved to keep track of these inventions, would love to keep track of the fertility of his inventive and creative powers. And also were a source of prestige, because these were very expensive objects, and to have produced so many for important patrons would have certainly contributed to create his own public persona. But I would argue that there is even that in addition to these quite reasonable reasons for having these drawings reproduced and preserved, was my argument is that this is also a way of beating an element that is particular to silverware and objects in general, but silverware in particular, their ephemerality. We don't have a sense that Giulio did the same with drawings for paintings, for frescoes, or for architecture even. These silverware were ephemeral, were objects in which they were not meant to last. Everyone knew that at the first crisis, these objects were taken to the mint and turned into hard cash. But they were not meant to survive. They were objects that are closer to an ephemeral arch than to an altarpiece. And so the need to preserve this invention was certainly, in my opinion, was part of this liquid nature of the metal. Metal was conceived as a watery substance congealed in the depths of earth. And therefore, these drawings preserved, how to say, what's the right word, counteracted against the ephemerality of the objects. Drawings, therefore, paradoxically, were meant to eternalize this invention, were meant to form drawings on paper, were meant to preserve for eternity. And therefore, the reason why they were replicated so often, to ensure that Giulio Romano was associated with these fantastic inventions that the object, the final object itself, could not claim. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Guido, for that fascinating new approach. It's a very different approach that we've seen so far in papers here, and I'm sure we'll get some really interesting discussion about that soon. So our final speaker is Giorgio Tagliaferro. Giorgio is Associate Professor at the University of Warwick, specializing in Renaissance and early modern European art, with a main focus on Venice. He's published widely on various aspects of Venetian art, especially on the self-representation of the Venetian Republic and on artists such as Titian, Tintoretto, and Veronese. He's the main author of Le Botteghe di Tiziano from 2009, and co-edited the volume Tintoretto, Identity, Practice and Meaning in 2022. His current book project is on the 16th century pictorial cycles in the Doge's Palace in Venice. Thank you, Giorgio.
Thank you so much, Lydia, for this nice introduction. So when Lydia and Michelle invited me to develop a paper on the theme of quality, I thought I could explore the reasons of the ineffable bewilderment that I feel as a visitor when I stare at a painting. Like the two people in this picture, trying to resist the temptation to read the caption and test my attribution skills, and eventually, after giving up and looking down to solve the riddle, a name crops up, but it is preceded, to my great disappointment, by the fatal formula workshop of. I therefore attempted to inquire into the implications of this formula and search for possible more gratifying alternatives. I must say I have not quite come up with conclusive solutions to some of the problems I came across during my investigation, but it was worth the endeavor, I believe, for it encouraged me to formulate and clarify my ideas, which I would like to share and possibly discuss with you. As we all know, workshop of is one of a set of established categories employed for old master paintings to indicate authorship based on actual facture, in accordance with an attribution system aimed at identifying hands within the same painting. For this reason, it is largely employed in the art market, but it is also extensively used by scholars and curators in other contexts. The aim of this paper is not to doubt the validity of the criteria used by that attribution system. Rather, by addressing the specific problems posed by the formula workshop of, I seek to question the heuristic power of this taxonomy in relation to the workshop practices implemented by Renaissance artists. In short, I intend to interrogate whether and how the use of the expression workshop of adds to and reflects, or takes away from and distorts, our knowledge of Renaissance workshop practices. By metonymic shift, where the place stands for the people who populate it, the expression workshop of identifies a painting as the creation of some. Okay, I should do this. All right, no. Okay, but you like the effect perhaps? So okay, there's okay, that's much better. By metonymic shift, where the place stands for the people who populate it, the expression workshop of identifies a painting as the creation of some unidentified collaborator or pupil of a given master without the master's actual participation. Admittedly, it denotes a lower quality level that deviates from a standard defined by a principal group of autographed works, from which this one is expunged. It rarely, if ever, points to substantial differences in technique, which are usually acknowledged by means of expressions such as follower, imitator, circle, school of, with a subtle but decisive shift in attribution. This means that the category workshop of results from subtraction. It recognizes closeness to a master, but indicates a gap in quality, which is bridged by reference to an anonymous supporting cast. It therefore ascribes works to a category that is not defined by authorship, but by the lack of it. We can conclude that this formula is used in a negative, derivative, and non-constructive way. By and large, it designates a routine work, often one obtained by reproduction, a copy, or replica. The term workshop itself suggests raw manual labor, craftsmanship at best, rather than intellectual inventiveness, indicating a maker rather than an author. Finally, the formula implies an underlying collaboration between master and assistants within a working environment, but at the same time, paradoxically, it denies such collaboration with the painting by excluding the master. All this considered, the category under examination, despite its terminology, seems to tell us less about workshop practices than about our shortcomings in establishing authorship. In fact, it automatically presents workshop paintings as worthless exceptions from a norm, instead of significant testimonies to standard procedures. Moreover, it sets apart the master from the collaborators and attaches some sort of independence to the latter, which, however, is hard to justify, for how could a workshop team act independently of the master's superintendence? It appears evident that the use of this formula has implications with three main concepts: quality, ownership, whose meaning ranges from autographness to invention, and originality, which entails authenticity as well as inventiveness. The expression workshop of identifies the drop in all these areas and automatically connects the drop with the absence of the master's hand. While other expressions like master with workshop or master with collaborators are used to explicitly indicate collaboration involving the master, workshop of detaches the master from any factual collaboration. On the other hand, it is not clarified whether the formula refers to collaboration between members of a workshop under the direct or indirect supervision of the master. In practice, the expression workshop of removes the idea of collaboration between master and assistants as a structural component of labor carried out in coterminous spaces, a structured collaboration that does not necessarily presuppose the master's actual participation in the facture of a painting, but requires his involvement in the concept and organization of the production system. In fact, not only can a workshop painting be considered, in principle, as the product of a collaboration that involves the master even without his manual contribution, but an autograph work by the master may reflect, under certain circumstances, the collaborative setup of workshop production. In this respect, an example of how the line between autograph and workshop paintings can be blurred is provided by these three variations of a Virgin and Child produced in Giovanni Bellini's workshop. By comparing the infrared analysis of the three versions, Maria Clelia Galassi has identified the master's hand in the other drawing of the Verona and Berlin paintings. All three, however, were obtained by reusing the same cartoon by means of spolvero, pouncing, so there is no way of establishing an original-to-copy relationship between them. Galassi concludes that the variable participation of the master in a collective-based production system forces us to reconfigure our traditional parameters to judge the originality of invention and the notion of autographia. And I have to say, she identified the hand not just in the underdrawing, but at different stages of the underdrawing, as well as the painting. Though in her image captions, Galassi differentiates between workshop of and master and collaborators, one can easily conclude that Bellini's presence underlies also the painting that he did not contribute to execute with his own hand. Not dissimilar, but just of the opposite sign, is the case of Titian's ideal female portraits. It has been demonstrated that these three paintings were on the easel all at the same time, which again dissolves the difference between original and copy. More importantly, the same face design was reused in each of these three, as well as in other paintings. Therefore, though these paintings are widely considered autograph works, the master followed a creative approach and employed a working method that he had presumably honed by implementing collective-based serial production, which is abundantly documented in Observer. As a matter of fact, collaboration does not rule out either authorship or originality. Collaborators may contribute to originals by the master, but even copies or replicas created entirely by collaborators may be perceived as equivalent to autograph originals when the master's authorship reverberates in them. A legitimate question is whether Renaissance people felt a clear distinction between what was done by a master and what was done by collaborators in a specific work. And how would this affect their understanding of authorship? A closer look at one case of collaboration disguised under the veil of authenticity can provide further insights into the problem. When Guido Baldo da Montefeltro commissioned the Madonna of Mercy from Titian, he declared that he would content himself with a painting diligently made by any of Titian's collaborators. The master, however, responded that he was determined to make it by his own hand, a formula that, as we know, signified quality control rather than actual execution. The painting, now in the Uffizi, is widely accepted as an autograph work. Still, it seems to me, almost entirely made by Marco Vecellio, Titian's cousin and one of his closest assistants, maybe with Titian's retouching, or maybe not. I'm not interested in demonstrating the attribution here. What matters to me is how a caption may reflect this collaboration, should it be confirmed. The documents suggest the painting was released as a Titian, which justifies the inclusion of his name in the caption. If we added collaborators or workshop, we should not acknowledge the identification of Marco Vecellio's hand. However, the inclusion of Marco's name poses some problems, for suddenly a collaborator becomes an author in his own right. Titian and Marco Vecellio would probably work, but would prioritize Titian, the trademark's owner and possibly also the designer, over the main actual maker, in conflict with the principles of attribution. Yet, Marco Vecellio and Titian would subvert the subordination of the assistant to the master, a clumsy fact that would not change if the caption read Marco Vecellio and Titian's retouching. Perhaps Titian, with the collaboration of Marco Vecellio, accounts for all the above factors, even though it only partially acknowledges the work of the collaborator. Whatever formula we choose, the example shows how the emergence of an artistic personality within a workshop team enhances our inclination to establish individual authorship, which obscures the sense of collective-based collaboration. The higher the reputation of the collaborator, the more conspicuous the effect. Take Giulio Romano. Sorry, Guido. If his name is placed next to Raphael's to caption a work in which both hands are believed to coexist, the painting is likely to be perceived as a collaboration between two great masters rather than a collaborative work between master and pupil under Raphael's name. Now, if Giulio made a painting in Raphael's studio without the contribution of the master, and this was released and sold as a Raphael, the system in use would take us to attribute the painting to Giulio alone. Yet something important about the creation and reception of that work would certainly get lost. Obviously, our own ability or inability to identify Giulio's contribution is crucial. In case we fail to recognize his hand, the painting would be classified as workshop of. But our failure would not change the actual status of the painting as a product of Raphael's studio, specifically made by Giulio. We should conclude that when we consider the context of workshop production, a painting made by Giulio on behalf of Raphael is equivalent, quality part, to any other painting made by an unidentified pupil, which would classify as workshop of. Clearly, the way we conceptualize workshop collaboration has an impact on the intertwined concept of quality, authorship, and originality in relation to a given painting. The coalescence of these elements is intrinsic to the artwork since its inception and is affected by several factors, both internal and external to the painting. The complexity of this process is captured by a testimony that comes from a slightly later time, but delineates a state of affairs that largely applies to the Renaissance. In 1618, Peter Paul Rubens proposed to the English ambassador Dudley Cotton a list of paintings of his own subdivided into originals and copies. The originals included works made both entirely by Rubens and by him with details painted by disciples. All the copies instead were based on some form of collaboration. However, Rubens deemed the copies were retouched by himself as valuable as the originals, and considered all the concerned paintings as di mia mano, regardless of their collaborative nature. Accordingly, authorship, in the sense of autographness, had no apparent impact on the pricing of the proposed works, which was based, as Rubens clarified, on quality, subject, and number of figures. Indeed, Rubens rated a hunt made by a collaborator and retouched by him more than the average price of the originals in the same deal. In principle, for Rubens, copies could match up to originals and collaborative works to autograph works. However, he claimed that his retouching would increase the quality of a copy, thus admitting the importance of his actual participation in the execution. Significantly, in 1621, a copy of The Lion Hunt was returned to him by Charles, Prince of Wales, because it was deemed to have been scarcely touched by Rubens and its quality was judged too low to be worth entering the future King's collection, to which Rubens responded by pledging to paint it anew on his own and blaming the intermediary, Dudley Courtauld, for not clarifying whether the painting should have been either entirely or only partially touched by his own hand. Evidently, the market was liable to acknowledge the master's hand as opposed to the work of collaborators, which may seem to give some historical justification to the formula workshop of. Yet, the episode shows that even a painting in which the buyer acknowledged some degree of participation, though scarce, on the master's end, was judged of poor quality. In the same way as we now judge paintings entirely by workshop assistants. Which leads to one crucial point. Authorship was not perceived as fragmented between originals and copies, or autograph and collaborative works, but was appreciated in its full gradation of quality. In his previous correspondence with Courtauld, Rubens pressed on to sell pieces he had already made and pledged to retouch existing copies to this end, should Courtauld wish so, thus revealing a production system set up to churn out copies with a master acting as quality supervisor, which could imply retouching. The market could acknowledge the greater or lesser participation of the master and perhaps relate it to quality, but quality judgment and the recognition of a master's hand were subjective. Some may value retouching, some may not, but buyers who knew or believed a given painting came from a master's studio did not call into question authorship in its broader sense, beyond the degree of actual execution. In fact, whether retouched or not, copies were originated from the same production system. By negating the presence of the master based on his non-participation in the facture of a painting, the expression workshop of obliterates the fact that the same painting was plausibly released as a lesser quality exemplar of the master's art to those who would be happy to buy it. When the Duke of Bavaria was offered a painting by Titian's disciples, retouched by the master, and one entirely by his disciples, the point was about possessing variants of Titian's many inventions, painted in his style, whose authenticity was guaranteed by their provenance from Titian's studio, while the lesser quality would be compensated for by a cheaper price. When the authorities of Brescia complained that 3 now lost paintings they commissioned from Titian were not di sua mano, they questioned the price in relation to quality, in the same way as the Prince of Wales deemed the quality of Rubens' hand inadequate for the standard quality of his collection. None of them challenged the authorship, though, nor did they consider the workshop a separate or abstract entity, as the formula workshop of does. What we gather from this is that the authorship of a work is determined by various factors, including the dialectic relationship between production and reception, which brought about the work itself. Likewise, quality is a more determinant factor than, and can be appreciated independently of, autographness. Quality variations define authorship in a more comprehensive and flexible way than the rigorous evaluation of autographness does. And if the formula workshop of is meant to acknowledge a diversification of product quality, then it limits the range of that diversification rather than not. Now, at the end of this learned disquisition, you would be entitled to ask me with what alternative captions I propose to replace this vexed formula. As anticipated, I have no firm answer to give, perhaps some suggestions to discuss, but the main point is that the category workshop of does not work as a blanket term because there are too many contextual factors which it is not able to account for. Its meaning changes according to the workshop and historical context it refers to, as well as the diversity or uniformity of an artist's production, the form, function, medium, and formats of the work, the market's recognition of authorship, and so forth. Finally, its connotation is modified by the context in which it is used. So my conclusion is that the exact formula itself is somewhat secondary. It is its use that matters the most, for it may or may not obscure our understanding of the historical and material reality of an object, which underlines the necessity to adjust and contextualize case by case the description of a workshop piece and illustrate its implications. Oh.
Okay, thank you both. I felt that was an appropriately rich and broad finish to discussions over the last couple of days, taking a new approach to the use of drawings, and Giorgio for just kind of opening up our whole thinking about how we use that word workshop in a wider way. So shall we just thank both our speakers from this session? Thank you very much. Okay, well, that brings us to the conclusion of the conference. I can hardly believe it.
I can hardly believe it myself. Really, I've just come up to say thank you to everyone. Thank you so much to our colleagues, all the speakers here, and those who couldn't come, but who have tuned in online, I know. And thank you to those who are here in the audience and out in the audience, and who participated so fully. It has been the kind of talking shop that I really hoped we would have. So thank you very, very much. We can't leave the room without thanking the director of the NIKI, Michael Kwakkelstein, the librarian, Kertjan Vandersman, who's been with us all the way through, and crucially, those who kept us on the screen. Lex Krul and Daphne Dane have done everything to keep this going, and we are very, very grateful. In fact, if anybody deserves a round of applause, it is those two. Thank you. We hope to hear more from you as time goes on. You can easily see how to get in touch with us. Please, let's keep these discussions going.